guys, welcome from Bulgaria. It's time for a second cup of coffee and part 2 of our data-driven chapter with JUnit. Let me share my screen. Just to quickly remind you what we did in the last chapter. As we discussed, I decided before talking about parallel testing with JUnit, first to talk about data-driven tests with it. Because there are many available options, as you'll see in this video, I split the chapter into two. Also, this video is part of our JUnit tutorial with Selenium, part of the Lambda test course about it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the ring bell so that you're notified about new videos. In the description below, you will find many articles, shortcuts to the part of the video, and also a link to the GitHub repo where you can play with all the examples and download the full open source code. Now, let me quickly remind you what we did before. We created a new example, more complex test, where I showed you how with a single WebDriver test written in Java together with JUnit, we were capable of automating 30 different web technologies such as React, Angular, Knockout.js, and many others. Basically, we're mentioning the name of the technology, we're opening the to-do application written in this particular technology, then we're typing new to-do items, and then we check some of them, and we check here in the test the left item's number. This is the code that we have so far. Basically, at the end of the previous video, part 1, we made the test data-driven, where this test will be run many times for each of these lines here, mentioning the different technologies. And JUnit makes it quite easy to make the test data-driven with a single parameter when we use this value source annotation together with this annotation here above, mentioning that this is a test with many parameters. And we created a few private methods where we open the particular technology every time we are waiting for a new for the element to appear. And then you can rewatch the video. We used a little bit of a more complex XPath locators. Just a quick reminder, if you're not really good at XPath, I suggest you to check the awesome article in the Lambda test blog about it, and you are going to learn how to write this XPath access and other cool locators that we use here. Now, it's part, as I mentioned, there are many different options depending on what you need in JUnit 5. Just a quick reminder, you need to install this Maven dependency called JUnit Jupyter Params in order to support all of these annotations that we're going to talk about now. Now, here we passed a string. However, JUnit is capable of parsing integers and other simple data types. In order to do so, I just added here a short snippet to show you. We need to import this class, and here, anyhow, you can just assert the number, right? Basically, the whole thing here is that this number here, you can pass int, double, whatever, it's completely fine. Also, you can use these constants here. If at some point, if you need here to pass null or empty string, this is also possible. In order to pass null, you need to use this annotation called nullsource. And basically one of the options will supply null. If you need to pass empty string, because here you can just pass empty source. Then for one of the options, for one of the tests, we are going to provide empty string. And if you want to provide both, there is combined annotation called null and empty source. Yeah, basically here is an example of it, right? We can write here assertions, assert is true, and we can anyhow, there is a special string class where we can check whether it's blank or not, or you can just compare it, right? For example, if it's null, we can write it like this. So yeah, basically, if you need in data-driven tests to provide an empty string or no, please use these two options. Next, the next really cool option is instead of listing here, all the technologies, we can create enumeration about them, and we can basically run a single test for every enum value. Let me show you. I'm going to create enum. I'm going to call it web technology. I'm going to add it to source control. I'm going to create one private field called technology name. And I'm going to create a getter and a constructor for it, like this. And afterwards, I'm going to add all the different options, like this. This is really possible. Here we are calling the constructor and we are providing the technology name. And later on, when you use this particular enum, we can get the technology name that we provided here. It's really cool. Let me show you how we can use it and create data-driven tests using this particular option. When we open the to-do tests, I can copy-paste this test. Here, I'm going to just rename it with a none. And here, I'm going to use the web technology. It's fine. And since it's enumeration, here I can call the getter get technology name. Of course, we are no more going to use this value source. Instead, there is another special annotation that comes from JUnit 5. It's called enumsource. And here in the constructor of this annotation, we can call web technology.class, and we are going to iterate through all of the different options of this enum. Let's run the test to show you that it's working. As you can see, backbone.js, this is the enum value. Then we're going to restart the browser and run it for the next tests. Now, it's possible to include a filter for this enumsource attribute. For example, just to include just part of the values of the enum. Let me show you how to do so. Enum filter, go to the ribbon. Here we're going to have the same with enum. Let's name it just filter, right? And now here we need to mention that this is the value, the web technology. Basically, this is the value here mentioning. And then we need to provide the correct names. Names equal then curly brackets, and then we need to include as strings the names of the enum values. Backbone.js and some of the rest, like this. this will run the tests only for this particular enum values. It's possible to create vice versa the exclude filter. Let me show you how to do it. Exclude. If you want to exclude them, then we need to change the mode. Here at the end, we can mention mode equal to mode dot, as you can see, match all, match any, or exclude. And now we are going to, of course, we need to change the name. Here I'm going to name it exclude. So we are going to run the test for all other enum values, and we are going to skip all of this for. And the last, more advanced version of this annotation is to use regex expression. You can use it for both exclude or include, no matter. And basically here, instead of listing all of the names, I can just mention a regex expression. And right now, I'm going to mention that I want to run the test for all of the values that are ending with JS. It's another option, right? Now, we have an option to run with the so-called CSVsource instead of a file. And let me show you how this works. I'm going to copy the first test here. Instead of value source, I'm going to add now more CSVsource without file. Basically, we are going to hard code comma separated all of the different parameters inside the annotation. And here, without file. And as I mentioned, I'm going to add, for example, item 1, string item 2, string item 3, string item to check, and we will have one more int expected left items. Of course, we need to use all of these parameters somewhere in the code in order to make sense. Here we're going to mention item 3 and item to be checked. And here we are going to change 2 with expected left items. And now, instead of value source, we are going to use CSV. CSV, as you can see, there is CSV file source, but we are going to use CSV source. And inside of it, of course, again, we need to provide the curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, comma separated, we are going to list all of the different options. The first one is the technology. Then, as in a normal CSV file, I will put comma. Then I will provide item 1, the first thing to add to the to-do item. Then the second one, the third one, and what we are going to check, again, comma separated. And the last parameter here, again, separated by comma, is the expected items count. And here, as a new string, we're going to supply the next set of parameters that basically this will be one test. And for example, for technology, we're going to supply backbone.js. Then for item 1, this will be clean the car, clean the house. By ketchup will be item 3. This will be item to check, and this will be expected left items. Then the second test will get this new string, basically it will split it by comma, by this separator, then we'll run the test second time. And the third test will use these new strings. If you want to change instead of comma to change basically the delimiter, you can do so by adding it here. Right now, by default, it's comma, right? But you can change it. Here, you can mention slash or something else. It's completely up to you. Just in order to use it, of course, you need to use velo, right? So you can change the delimiter if you want, if you don't want to use comma. And yeah, for each string here, we are going to run the test one time. If you want to use a real CSV file, it's completely fine. You need to place it here, the CSV file, right, in the resources folder. And again, instead of CSVsource, we are going to use CSVsource file. And we need just to provide here which is the file and how many lines we need to. Here, I'm just going to rename it to with 5. So just you need to create this data CSV file here on the resources. And I'm mentioning that I'm going to skip the first line, which is basically the names of the columns, right? Now, more sophisticated way to, and for me, it's maybe even a better approach compared to this CSV files or this complex thing here, because you need to parse in your head what will happen. I prefer to use the so-called method source, which means that we are going to use a special method that is going to produce all of the arguments that you need. Let me show you what I mean. And this time, by the way, first I'm going to use the method source just to simplify this test here with just a single parameter, and then I'm going to show you even more advanced way, better way how you can handle data-driven tests. The first thing is here. I'm going to name this with method, and of course at the bottom I need to create a new method that is going to return stream of strings. It should be private, static. It will return stream of string. And I'm going to name it provide web technologies. We need to import the string class, and then we're going to return. There is a special factory method of the stream.off, and here we need to provide, similarly to how we create empty lists, we need to provide all of the strings here. I already copied them, so I'm going to copy paste them. It's the same way how you initialize lists, right? And now when we have this particular name, we need, let's see where it is. We need to use another annotation called methodsource. Let's return to the test here. This is without params, with method. Here it is. We don't need this velo source, right? Instead, I need basically to mention the name of the method, provide web technologies, method source. And basically this will call my method below, and we are going to run it. Now, there is more sophisticated way working with parameters. Let me show you. Until now, especially with the many arguments, the test was a little bit dummy, right? the best way to do it is actually here to provide a list of strings for the items to check. Items to check, and list of the items to be checked. Items to add, excuse me, and list items to check. Actually, this is the name of the variable. It's type of list string, and of course, integer expected left items. Now, how we are going to use this? Instead of calling this hard-coded with these three types, here I'm going to use stream API, or basically you can just go for or for each. For each them and just call this method for each of the items into the collection, but I want to make the test more concise, so I'm going to use stream API to simplify it and write it in a single on a single line. So I'm going to call for each, and here I'm going to name a variable called item to add, and then I'm going to call add new to do item to add. Like this, and then we don't need this three here, and then I'm going to call items to check string for each item to check lambda row get item checkbox item to check. Then I'm going to click it here, right? This way we can basically add any number of items that we put into the method source and basically check the different types, any number, not hard-coded. And here I'm going to change this to expected left items. Now I'm going to create a new method that it's called provide web technologies multiple parameters. Let's see how we can do that. Now, instead of returning here stream of strings, we're going to return private stream of a special class called arguments. And now we are going to return stream of. And here, actually, we are going to call it like this. On a new line, we call arguments, and then we have another special factory method, where for each of the tests, we're going to create different set of arguments. Our first argument here will be the technology. In our case, this will be AngularJS, the first one. Then we need, if we return, we then need list of string and then a second list of string and then the expected count. So here we need to provide list of, again, we have a factory method for creating lists. And then here I'm going to mention a different list of items to be added. And then here we need to add a second list of items to be checked, right? So right now I want for my first test just to check these two, by ketchup and by a house. And this means that there will be 3 items left. Then I need to close the factory method here. Let's see what happened. Yeah, here it is. Basically, this will be the arguments for my first test. We provide the technology AngularJS, then the first list. These are the items to be added. Then these are the 2 items to be checked. And then 3 items are left, because here we have 5, we check 2, 3 items are left, and we are going to assert them. And here I provided a few other lists. Basically, we are going to run 4 tests here. And we need to mention it right here. This is the perfect data-driven tests, right? Now, sometimes it's useful when you create these complex factory methods for arguments. We want sometimes to be able to reuse them. In order to do so, we can basically JUnit provide us with a special class that it's called. Let me show you. It's called arguments provider, and this arguments provider, even before it, actually we can, before the arguments provider, we can create a special class just to reuse it as a static method. I call this Web Technologies Parameterize Factory, right? I'm going to add it to source control. And then basically I copy it and paste it, my method here. I'm just going to make it public. And I can use this method here instead of using the private static method inside my test class, just by using this method source, basically the full classified method name, the package, the name of the class, and then the name of the method. So I can reuse this arguments methods with this. However, I believe this is really ugly everywhere to provide these long strings. And this is why, as I mentioned before, there is another way in JUnit. It's called custom argument provider. So I can create a new Java class called Web Technologies for Technology Custom Arguments Provider. I'm going to add it to source control. And here we need to implement a special interface called arguments provider. I'm going to implement the method. Here it is. We are overriding. As you can see, there is a stream, something that extends arguments. It's a special class. Anyway, inside, we're just copy pasting the return of streams that we used before. And when you have this, basically you can, when we return to the to-do tests, we can use directly this arguments provider now. There is a special annotation called argumentsource. Here, I'm going to rename this as argument source. And instead of providing the name of the method, we need to mention the provider dot class. I actually renamed it. So here we provide the class where our implementation of the arguments provider is. And this is going to run perfectly fine. The next thing that I wanted to show you before we close up the chapter is how you can basically convert dates and other important strings into other classes. For example, imagine that we have a method. Let's say it's public public void. I'm going to call it verify year when custom converter. And here we are going to provide local date, and then int expected. And here I'm going to use the CSVsource that we used before. and we are going to call assertions 34 expected date get year. However, without help, JUnit won't be able to convert this string here to a local date, because as you can see, it's something custom, right? It's separated by comma. These are two different tests here. This is the expected year, and this is the year where we need to initialize the local date. In order to handle this, we need to implement argument converter. Let me show you. Here, I'm going to create a special class that I'm going to name dash date converter. And we need here to implement argument converter. I'm going to implement the method. Here, there is just a check to make sure that we have the correct source or object here. Then this is the logic where we are going to initialize the local date. Basically, I'm converting the object to a string, then we are splitting by dash. And then when we split by dash, I'm getting the three different parts. I'm parsing the integers here, year, month, and day. And then I'm using the factory method of to initialize the local date. Otherwise, we're throwing an exception. In order to use this dash converter, when we return to our tests, there is a special annotation that we provide before the local date. And here I can mention before the local date that I want to use my converter, convert with, and then I need to provide the name of the class, dash date converter dot class. This way we'll be able to parse this and convert it to local date, which is really great. Sometimes also, instead of providing so many arguments here, we want to directly create a data-driven test together with just a simple class. In order to be able to create a data-driven test with special classes, let me show you what we can do. I can create a class called to-do list, and I will have these four variables. Then in IntelliJ, I can press Alt Insert. I can initialize a constructor, and then when I select them and press Alt Insert, I can generate getters and setters for all of them. Actually, I want to create a constructor for all these four variables instead of just one. Alt Insert. I just forgot to select all of them like this. And then I want to use this to-do list with my argument source provider. Let's go back. Here we have this arguments provider, right? And we want to extend it. Instead of providing all of these different here, it's to-do list class, or with single argument. And here, instead of all of these different arguments, I'm going to use to-do list. And now I want here to use the getter get technology. Then here items to add. To-do list. Get items to check, and to-do list get expected items left. However, in order to support that, we need to implement basically an aggregator. We need to implement the arguments aggregator interface. And I'm going to call this aggregator class to-do list aggregator. I'm going to add it to source control, and we need to implement arguments aggregate. Implement methods. And now, basically, I need to return new list, new to-do list, and then we can get this argument accessor and say there are a few methods. Since our first argument is string, we can use getString 0. Then, since we don't have a method directly to get, as a list of string, we need to use the get method that it's returning an object. And because this object is actually a list of strings, we convert it like this. Then, since our third parameter is also a list, we need to convert it one more time. And then for arguments, we have a method called getInteger, where we need to mention 3. And now, if we want to use the list aggregator, we can go. Now, if you return to the tests with a single, and now here there is another special, instead of convert with, there is another special annotation called aggregate with, and here we need to provide a name of our aggregator, then dot class, and it's going to work like a charm. And the last thing that I wanted to show you is actually how we can customize the names. I already showed you this in the first chapter, but I'm going to remind you in the context of data-driven tests. Basically, you can, let's say that we want to change the name for this test here. I can use the constructor like this, the brackets, and then I can say name. The index will be, this will be 0, this will be 1, right? This is the special variable index. Then we can provide any display name that we want, and we can access the different arguments with this syntax here. This will access the first parameter, then 1 will be the second, and so forth. The same way we access them in lists. As you can see, there are many different options depending on your use case. This is why I created basically a second video about this, that it's covering more stuff. And because we have now many tests, like 20 different tests, in the next video we're going to talk about parallel testing with JUnit. So don't miss it. Hit the subscribe button below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below the video or in the GitHub repo that you can find in the description. Also, as I mentioned, there are many awesome articles about JUnit on the Lambda test blog. And don't forget about the certification after you finish these videos or the blog series about JUnit to get recognized. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Take care.